Hi, good evening, everyone here in India, and a good day to everyone elsewhere in the world. I'm Shitanshu Jain from Capricorn Win Zero India, and today in this webinar, the Thought Leadership webinar, we have some very exciting stuff for everyone present to showcase how we believe that the future of work in construction is going to change. We have a global thought leaderships and experts from the construction industry today present, Miss Amy Marks and Dr. Anand Sani will introduce them shortly. And before we do that, I would like to invite Mr. Chakresh Jain, Capricorn Chairman, Winzero India, to give us short overview about who we are as Capricorn and how we are bringing the latest technologies, processes, and tools to your organizations.
Thank you, Shitanshu. And it's my pleasure to welcome Emmy and Professor Sani here. And it's my honor to be with them and hear them. I'll be very eagerly hearing them. So I like them to spend most of the time. I'll just take 2 minutes to introduce because we also have some exciting news about Capricorn to be shared with all our participants here. So we have been also innovating ourselves, looking at how we can keep on improving ourselves. And as a part of that journey, we started about 10 years back. 4 partners in the country in India, we merged together to form the Capricorn. And now we had this new opportunity where 4 of us have again now merged into 3 other global companies and formed this new company by the name WinZero. So I'd like to talk a little bit about WinZero on the next slide. So now we are part of 4 Autodesk AEC focused partner, US CAD based out of US, A2K based out of Australia, CAD Line based out of UK, and of course, Capricorn based out of India. So we all 4 have now formed this global alliance by the name WinZero. And our focus is, of course, to support our customers with much deeper and experts throughout the world. So we'll just move to the next slide. So as Capricorn, of course, we've been now serving our customers for more than 30 years. With more than now within India itself, we have serving more than 20,000 customers from the industry like yourself. And we are located in 4 major locations with more than 250 inspired partners. So I'll not like to take much time. I'll just like to pass back to Shitanshu to take it forward.
Thank you so much. So with this, I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers who are present on this call. So they are they don't need any introduction if you're part of the construction technology industry, but just so people who are new to this or might not know them. So they have decades of experience in the construction industry, especially in the technology and technology implementations. They are the global thought leaders, especially related to industrialized construction and DfMA, which is designed for manufacturing and assembly. So with this, first I would like to introduce Miss Amy Marks. She is known as #Queen of Prefab, and she's a Vice President for Industrialized Construction at Autodesk. And today we would like to hear from her around her thoughts around how this is going to change. So Miss Amy, I would request you to give a short introduction about yourself, and then we'll move on to Sani sir.
Sure, I'm happy to. I am, as you said, the Vice President of Industrialized Construction. I work globally with all of our customers around the world to help them on their journey to transform through methodologies like industrialized construction, sustainability, and better use of the Autodesk platform and our technology and creating better business models.
Thank you so much. And next, I would like to introduce Dr. Anand Sani. He has been part of academia and construction industry across the world. So UK, India, US, if you have been part of this 2 industry, you would already know him. Personally, he had been a mentor to me for almost a decade now since I started my journey. So with this, right now he's a global lead for construction and infrastructure at RICS US. So with this, sir, I request you to give a short introduction about yourself and what we can expect today.
Thank you so much, Shitanshu, and thanks, Amy, for taking the time for this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. Some of you may know, I've taught at IIT Delhi, then I taught at the RIC School of Built Environment. It seems like I have a around the world ticket and I keep moving. And sometimes LinkedIn is the best way to track me where I am. But I'm so pleased to today have this conversation, especially because I think industrialized construction is so timely, important, and relevant to the Indian construction sector. So hopefully today we'll tease out some of the reasons why it is the right time and we have the right motivations and the right kind of environment to push industrialized construction. So I've also written a textbook on Construction 4.0, which is, I guess, a cousin of industrialized construction in a way. And that's where I met Amy. We sort of started on a slightly negative way. I called offsite. She says offsite is nothing. It's prefab. You could do offsite, onsite, near site. And really, we then found there's a lot of common ground where we can work together. And I had the good opportunity to work with Amy in developing an open source industrialized construction curriculum, which she has really spent so much time, her own personal time to develop. And that's freely available to all of you as well. Shitanshu, maybe we can try and promote that curriculum. If somebody wants to get the basics of industrialized construction, that'll be a good place to start. So thanks for inviting us. Chakreshi and Shitanshu, look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Dr. Anil, we always say there's no true collaboration without conflict. So I think that's always a good place to start.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Dr. Sani, for your introduction. So let's kickstart the discussion. I think you have a lot things to cover with the audience today. So I'll start. So coming from the construction industry, there's still a lot to learn for me personally, for everyone in the audience. So, but coming to the topic of today of IC and DfMA, why do you think this is important, or what are the motivations which are promoting adoption of IC and DfMA in the industry today, especially with context to developing countries like India? So, Ms. Amy, if you can share your thoughts around that. Yeah.
Sure, I'll be happy to share my screen as well. And show
I'll just stop sharing. Yeah.
I think before we go into like why it's so important just for one region, in reality, we should start talking about expected experience in our world, and so before we get into specifically construction, let me just show you this slide right here. In our world right now, I could order a pizza on my Apple Watch. I could customize it. I could pay for it. I could see when it's coming in and out of the oven. I could understand the travel time that the driver is going to have in order to come to my home. I would see the license plate number and the make and model of that driver's car and see his picture. And I would see my digital doorbell. I would see him arriving, and I would know he was here before my dog could bark. And that is the expected experience in ordering a pizza today in many places around the world, including India. And yet, in construction, we often call somebody to call somebody to call somebody to call somebody else to figure out where a very expensive piece of critical equipment is and how and when it's showing up on our job sites. We have to change that notion. And what's going on right now is just like in the, thanks to Domino's My Pizza example, we're seeing convergence happen. We're seeing the blending, the melding of things like technology, as you saw in that pizza example, or, I always like to say my iPhone is not just my phone anymore. It's my directions. It's my entertainment. It could be your babysitter. It may be your dating app. And that technology is converged and process has converged, which has created industry convergence, think industrialized construction. And that's really changed our business models to start thinking about how convergence is affecting our business model, how we're working in humans and machines, how this really needs to affect our sustainability outcomes. That's been a really critical reason of why now, because yes, we've had people, but look what's going on with COVID, Anil and Dr. Anil. That's just hastened this pace, right?
Absolutely. So if I may add at this stage my views, I think one question as experts in our sector, all of us, including those who are joined in today, is how long can we continue as only a craft-oriented industry? When can we shift into product orientation? That's sort of one basic question we all need to ask ourselves. I'm not saying shift 100% to product orientation, but we got to think carefully the balance between craft orientation and product orientation. That sort of brings you closer to this idea of convergence, expected experience, and then into industrialized construction. The second thing we need to see is the last 3 years and so many geopolitical things happening, the war in Europe, COVID, as Amy mentioned, climate crisis, which we all are keenly aware of, and all other related issues that are impacting the environment in which we deliver projects. So if that's the situation, is there a solution? Is there something we need to do and shift forward? And COVID has taught us that technology is a good friend of the construction sector, but is it technology alone that can help us? You've seen, I think, Amy and I, we've come to this conclusion that we've seen 5 mega trends impacting the industry, and all of you have heard of them. The physical side of 3D printing, the robotics, the automation, AI, ML, drones, all those things can be classified into 5 mega trends. So the next challenge for us is to really see these as independent, one at a time mega trends, or do we want to see them as a cohesive set of tools, technologies, and enablers that push our sector to the next level? And that's where industrialized construction comes in. It provides a connected, a glued up approach to all these mega trends and really provides us with something that we can utilize. So I think, Shitanshu, I suggest we ask Amy to move from convergence into really level set all of us in terms of getting a definition of what is industrialized construction. Amy, is it just prefab or is it much more than prefab? Perhaps a good conversation there is going to help.
I think it's a great question because there are so many people that ask me on a daily basis, like, well, we're talking about boxes stacked on boxes, right? Isn't that what you're talking about? We're only talking about modular, or we're only talking about, you know, some assembly. And that's actually not true. I like to think of industrialized construction as, you know, the application of manufacturing techniques to the built environment in totality, to the conceptualization, the design, pre-construction, construction, commissioning, even, you know, when we're thinking about things like operations monitoring and digital twins and things of that sort, there's both process and technology enablers as the basis. And for those of you who follow lean practices, you know, I like to think of this as an homage to the house that Toyota built. This is my homage to the house that industrialized construction built. And at its foundational level, there are things like technology enablers. We're in a highly censored world these days, highly instrumented world. I guarantee you, you can't go anywhere without being tracked. And that's I don't think it's a bad thing, some may, but I think it's a great thing that I actually say the words. Look, I could say the words coffee today, and I will have 50 ads on like how to buy coffee today on every one of my devices in my home. But it's good because we can actually look at assemblies, understand where they're at, where they're coming from. I have good friends that send me a sheet every day that shows me their equipment being tracked on ships. And every 15-minute increments, if that ship is late, it tells them and alerts them that that generator, as an example, might be late to their job site. So we have the ability to understand things like machine learning in looking at huge sums of data, things like AI to help us sort through that. And we want to really understand the big data that's available and analytics around those because we have that ability to highly instrument our world. And I believe really the other technology enabler is an open cloud platform. So for many of you who used to call our platform development app Forge, it's now called the Autodesk Platform Services. And so I believe that an open platform like at Autodesk that allows people to actually talk to one another through the cloud. I mean, we all learned that during COVID, that if it's on your desktop only these days, that's probably not a great thing. We need other stakeholders to be able to access things in the cloud, and we need other tools that I always say, think of how many apps it takes you to get from your house to make a reservation at a restaurant and get there on time. It's not one tool on my Apple platform, one app. It's probably 10 apps, some that Apple own on my phone and some that don't. I happen to use Waze, others like Google Maps. Think about what an open platform does for efficiency. And that's part of this house, as well as the process enablers of things like once you can instrument things and understand product and process development, you can actually use predictive manufacturing tools to understand process simulation and emulation. We all know that building information modeling, I always say it's like being at a carnival. You have to be this tall to ride the ride. You have to get on three-dimensional CAD, things like Revit, to enable building information modeling at many levels so that you can have things like informed design. And you see a reference there to manufacturing informed design, but it's not just manufacturing informed design. It's informed design around sustainability, around carbon, around circularity of the materials, around cost. We need to have informed design beyond just a BIM model. And that I in the BIM model that will become intelligent, not just information. And I know many of you think about design for manufacturing and assembly being DfMA. I actually like to think of it differently as the data for manufacturing and assembly, because it's really the data that is going to make us really smart about how we're going to be doing things. And if you don't know the data from the makers, from the manufacturers who are making those assemblies, those building products, you really have nothing. We only have assumption-based design at that point. So the data has become at the forefront of importance, so that, as Anil and I first met, Dr. Anil, we would talk about, it's not just about boxes. There's this continuum of things that are being made, like advanced building products, things that reduce drying time and curing time and welding time, hot work, but also single trade assemblies like pipe spools or electrical whips, all the way up through multi-trade assemblies, things like bathroom pods or distribution racks or risers, even elevators, up through volumetric modules. But I like to think now that prefabrication happens somewhat downstream. If you truly have productized those elements, those components, you then have products that can inform your designs. And the data is also inclusive of some of those trends that Dr. Anil talked about, robotics and automation, how we're going to be making things with advanced building methodologies, using additive manufacturing and other methodologies that we have yet to even uncover. And I think this is how you truly want to think about industrialized construction. How did that help, Anil? Does that get us all on the same page?
No, I think, and it actually, Amy, you don't have to call me Dr. Anil, let's just stick to Anil, but the way it clicked to me when I saw this slide we discussed, I guess it's included now part of the IC curriculum that I just shared with the audience as well, the link to that, is when I was thinking about our sector, I was thinking we need to change how we do digital tools, how do we develop them and use them. So there's sort of a digital transformation pillar that we need to address. Then we need to address physical or product-related innovation and transformation. How we do sticks and bricks, how do we do parts, components of components and assemblies. And lastly, we need to also consider people, processes, practices, and the actual delivery. So there are three pillars of transformation in my mind that are needed. And this actually puts that into a very clear picture as to what are the enablers, what is the physical or the product side of things that we need to think about, and what are the other pieces of the puzzle that are needed. So I think, and that's what I meant by saying providing a connected or a glued up picture of our operating model or of our operating system, and that's industrialized construction. We're very good at doing things one at a time. If you think about BIM, we just think about BIM and keep working at BIM, not seeing the connection to the physical layer. I think industrialized construction helps us consider all the transformations, all the enablers, all the pillars that we need to address. And that's why I like this definition also. Shitanshu, I think perhaps at this stage, maybe you can shed some light as well. Do you see these transformations happening in the Indian construction sector? And should we address this issue of is industrialized construction relevant to India and other emerging markets?
So short answer is yes, sir. There is no doubt about it. This is something which is required or the need of the hour, especially in the developing countries like India, where you see the volume of construction is, I believe, it's probably we have enough pipeline for next 20, 30 years already in place of work. And to deliver that volume of work with sustainable construction practices within cost and on time, we need these kind of technologies. So I'm come more from a generic and kind of environment. So you are specialist, so you will be able to shed more light. So in fact, today I was discussing this event with somebody, and and there's also a question to you. So like, who is IC and DfMA for? Who should be the stakeholders involved in this process? Because when you talk about DfMA, people assume it is for only manufacturing industry, or it is only for manufacturers, and not for the design consultants or for the not for the construction companies or owners per se. So again, a question. So so putting this out as a question. So, and because we have varied kind of people in the audience, who is DfMA for? And that will probably answer like whether it is required or not in the industry, or who are the right people who should be focusing and who should be paying importance into the why is DfMA changing the industry?
I think it's a great question, by the way. I feel like we could do an hour-long presentation to each one of those stakeholders that you just mentioned and why this is important to them. And so, I had my own mentors in my career, people like Clayton Christensen is a good example. And he talked about the innovator's dilemma of chipping away at the bottom to replace an incumbent and about how disruption actually works in industries. The fact of the matter is this is like the innovator's deception, right? So the piece I'm working on is called the innovator's deception because it's not a bottom-up small change. Let's talk about stakeholders that are top-down, the biggest of the bigs that have the money to spend. They're not doing one data center anymore. They're doing 30 data centers. They don't need to build one hospital anymore. They need to build 25 hospitals. They need, the owners at the top of that food chain have to create the most pressure and have the most to gain. Why? Look, I'm from New York. I'm going to say it like a New Yorker can only say. If you have the checkbook, you get to say what's going to happen. And not just because you have the checkbook, they're realizing it's not just their money they have to spend. It's about the certainty of the operations from an owner perspective as a great example. They have to have the hospital beds opening up with certainty. They need to have capacity running through their data centers. They need to build car manufacturing plants that are actually getting cars through them. The buildings are not the value for many of these large owners, as an example. It's the things that are running through them that they make their real money on. And I think, so it's like, that's one of the biggest stakeholders creating some of the biggest pressure and seeing some of the benefits around certainty of operations. I definitely believe that, although the designers are becoming and wish to become more like generative designers, they are changing the technology they're using to consume the data and use their domain expertise and, creating a digital experience so that they can consume the maker's data, not just of the manufacturers, but of the new manufacturers, the MEP subcontractors and the general contractors that are now fabricating. They're doing it for many, many years because they're recognizing that that's the only productive way in many of the developed countries that they can make money at these jobs right now because of the lack of skilled labor that's out there. Because look, people want to co-locate their daycares, their college experiences, their lives around a factory if they can. So that's why, those are important stakeholders that we could do, a 5-hour. In fact, in the course, Anil, there's a whole module about the rise of the MEP, subcontractor into these types of manufacturers. But I think even down to the end user and to the, facilities managers, people want consistency and certainty. I'll go back to my Domino's example. My expected experience is every time I walk into get a Domino's pizza, or I walk into a Marriott hotel, or I walk into some brand where I know what it's going to look like, what my experience is going to be. That should be your expected experience every time you build or participate in designing or building a building. It shouldn't be like we've never designed or built a hospital ever before. That we have to stand on the shoulders of what our knowledge base is. And in order to do that, you need technology to capture that knowledge so you can reuse it.
And Shitansh, if I can add to that, I'll probably share a very old example that I came across. In production home building, you have single family homes being built. one activity that takes place is that when the slab on grade or the foundation, concrete foundation is laid, an anchor bolt is placed so that the superstructure, which would typically be a timber frame here in the US, can be connected structurally to the foundation. And many a times the concrete trade contractor would place those incorrectly. Sometimes they get kicked off location, sometimes they're missing, causing a lot of rework, a lot of expenses, thousands of dollars spent on fixing that issue. Now, somebody came up with an idea of what colloquially is called a monkey paw. It's a little orange device, a plastic device that can be placed while the slab on grade is being placed, so that the anchor bolt can be seen. It can be kicked around when the concrete is still green. It can be placed at the right location, and it can be attached correctly when the framing subcontractor shows up. Cost about $2. And it's an example of how we want to use DfMA to help even downstream subcontractors or trade partners. In this case, folks, you will think last when you think about industrialized construction. So really, it can help the entire process. It can help downstream trade partners or subcontractors also. So I think done the right way, industrialized construction, especially data and design for manufacturing and assembly, can be helpful to all stakeholders. But I think Amy is right. The push needs to come from the owners, the clients, to take on this product orientation approach early on, because sooner we think about it and do it, the most benefits can be gained early in the design process. Absolutely, when I was in Phoenix, I could see 20 years ago how the MEP contractors were really taking this head on. Even there was a term coined at that time called lonely bin. So MEP subcontractors will bring 2D drawings into their shop and create a 3D model so that they can do their work and probably not tell anyone that they built a 3D model, to get their fabrication, their CNC machines and everything working in the right way for their part of the trade. So I think you will see many trends that point to this, that the whole value chain can benefit from industrialized construction.
I think, by the way, Anil, we have some great questions in Q&A right now. And I'm going to start gagging deep. You asked, I'm going to start with your second question first, because I think it's so interesting. And the question is, what are the lessons that the Indian industry can learn from mistakes? Use these words, not me, but mistakes done by our European and American markets. And I would say, look, first of all, if you think you're the first one ever doing something on this planet, think expected experience. You're probably not. Go and find an expert in our ecosystem, outside of our ecosystem, that has already done something like you want to do. And I 99% of the time can guarantee you they exist. Call me, I'll send you to whoever the person is that does it. So what can you learn in India? Listen, Michael Porter, at Harvard Business School, taught me about Silicon Valley and why Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley. Let's talk about what India could be and how you could look at something like an innovation cluster for industrialized construction around India. You're talking about having, the right mindset in your people there, like where education is important, and you have alignment with universities that are teaching these courses like industrialized construction that are now free for them to offer. You need sort of that link to that academia and to the growing market of workforce that's coming. You need government to really support, like you've seen in Singapore, where they're incentivizing groups, where they're incentivizing to use new technologies and to use DfMA. They call it PPDC in some cases and other names, but they are incentivizing as government, authorities having jurisdiction to do more of this. And then you have an epicenter in India of technology already, fantastic partners that can enable technology in your particular market that would allow you to really embrace this and capture it. And once you've mapped it out, to actually automate some of these more complex workflows and really gain some efficiencies. And I think there's, a few other things. You have an actual need, which is part of that innovation cluster, where, I see the other question that Nitin is asking, the rise in commodity prices right now in logistics because of the frequent strikes and the price hikes. it's shifting what we're thinking about when it comes to supply chain, right? It's making us become more certain upfront, understanding some of these pressures that are happening with supply chain and costs and delivery models. It's making us change what's important to us. And I think that kind of pressure from an import-export conversation of supply chain and local partners versus, Western partners versus Asian, partners that are out there for you, that you have the opportunity. That's some of the reasons why India could be a fantastic, innovation cluster around DfMA. And yes, can you learn things that have happened? 100%. My only advice is learn from the people that actually learned from their mistakes. It's one of the reasons why I love what I do. And I love the Advancing Prefabrication show that happens, that Anil knows, in Phoenix every year. You get people sharing the successes and the failures at many different levels, so that it's not just about marketing the greatest case study you saw last year. It's about learning how to do things the correct way and learning from our mistakes. So I think that's really important, because I'll get to Gagandeep's first question. What's the biggest roadblock for the built environment these days? I will tell you that probably the biggest roadblock is, first, level setting on education and understanding, level setting on maturity. If you wanted to replicate if you have a local pizza place right now and you wanted to replicate what Domino's franchises have in their technology, that took a lot of investment, a lot of learning, a lot of understanding your capabilities. If you were just my grandma making pizza in her home to become Domino's, I think the biggest roadblock right now is having people understand where their maturity assessment is and getting educated to make sure that they're ready for change. And I don't know if you'd agree, Anil, but anything is possible. Like teaching you how to make something or do something or that's the easier part in some ways. It's this understanding of where you want to go and where you currently are at that I think is one of the biggest roadblocks.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the next story that you're going to share with us on transformation and maturity level comes into play. But before we get there, to answer, I think one of the questions, was it Gagandeep? Yes, who asked, I think one of the, without naming names, you can learn probably from the $2 billion mistake that we did in the US. One certain company went belly up because of many factors. So you could study that as a case study of why industrialized construction has to be done in a very systematic way and clearly see where you are, where your journey is going to take you, and what are the steps. It's not a straight line or a linear path. You may have to crisscross, and always keep in mind that it's just not about digital transformation. It may be also connecting digital and physical. If you have good digital models and good data, but you can't connect it to fabrication, for example, or can't connect it to a product-oriented approach between your design teams, between your construction and your trade partners, again, you would not be able to make much progress. So in a way, there are lots of lessons that you can learn from, I guess, US and Europe. One of them I just shared with you. And to this issue of, I guess, what are the biggest roadblocks? I think one of the roadblocks is that we are, and I'm guilty as charged, very good at admiring the problem. We keep on admiring this issue that we are not technology savvy as a sector. We don't adopt innovation. I think time has gone. We have understood the problem. We need to now attack the solution and come up with answers to the age-old problems we face. And some of the things we need to ask ourselves: would last-minute supply chain, just-in-time issues, on-site, in situ processes going to help us with supply chain disruptions and price fluctuations, or a more controlled environment, near-site, off-site, on-site process is going to help us? Will the same prefabrication processes help us reduce embodied carbon? These are the main questions we need to ask us, because no longer it's about just cost or the first cost. We have to start thinking about life cycle costs. We have to start thinking about carbon emissions. So when we discuss those outcomes that are now demanded from our sector, you will very quickly see where the blockers are and how to overcome those blockers. So I think we have addressed most of the questions that
So,
are.
sir, one question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's on the Q&A also. It was very pertinent. What's the
Sure.
role of government in IC? In India, especially, government is the biggest client, investor, owner of the infrastructure assets, and also the policy making body. So how then they, like you mentioned, owner being the checkbook and all, they are the drivers of technology. So again, like how do we enable government bodies to do that?
First of all, when you're talking about government, who is one of the biggest owners, just like Singapore, who owns most of the housing in Singapore, it is even more imperative that they are spending your people's money in the safest possible way. Let's talk safety for 1 minute. The fact that I walk around this world, I'm not speaking of any one country in particular, because that would be insulting, but I walk my way from my hotel to boardrooms and watch basically construction slavery in some countries, where I see grandmas barefoot in large hats tying rebar on job sites, where I see unsafe practices going on for even high-rise big buildings. Where in our lives would that expected experience even fly? You would never buy a blood diamond anymore in this world. You would never buy something from a manufacturer that had unsustainable practices, that was polluting. And yet, if you're government, you have to remember that your money needs to be spent in order to create a safer environment for those that are involved in the process, a more consistent and certain outcome to replicate. And you should be owning the data as an owner that enables you to make predictive choices next time. If you are a hands-off owner and just saying, these are my requirements, build as you will, without the use of building information modeling being required, without the use of things like project management, digitization, software being provided, without the understanding of promoting industrialized construction methodologies as a requirement, and without understanding the data that you are trying to collect to reuse, you're basically an irresponsible owner at this point, in my feeling. You're basically, condoning the behaviors that happen when you are keeping it at arm's length. So I think government has a huge responsibility for things like housing, for things like healthcare, for things like digital infrastructure. Look, it's not only emerging markets. In the United States, when COVID happened, we had kids that couldn't go to school because they didn't have data centers near those areas in order to get their online school at the time. That is government's responsibility to make sure that the people that live in those countries have safe places to eat, live, work, pray, do whatever they want to do in a safe environment that they're able to. So I think it's a huge responsibility when you're talking about government, even more so than a private owner, right? I think that's my own opinion about that.
And Shitanshu, on that, let me give you two examples. Right in India, the Housing for All initiative, for example, is a great example of how government, industry, academia came together to address this issue of affordable housing. In the beginning, when the program was launched, I was part of the technology subcommission of the Housing for All Commission that the government had set, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. And I think BMTPC, and especially my good friend, Dr. Shailesh Agarwal, has done good work in this area and has shown how technology can help solve the affordable housing problem in India. Similarly, if you look at UK probably outside of Singapore and Hong Kong is probably one of the few governments that has promoted product orientation. In fact, there are publications now for schools, for other type of social infrastructure where product-based platforms and product DfMA guidelines have been produced. Excellent work has been done, and the industry, government, and academia have come together to promote this idea of utilizing some of this product orientation and industrialized construction concepts in the building of those social infrastructure. So I think lots is happening and much more needs to happen. At RICS, we have produced a document called the Informed Client. The client needs to be smart and informed about these initiatives, because the contractors, designer, engineers will get motivated if the owner asks the right question. Why is there so much rework? Why is there so much waste? And today waste, and Amy has a slide on this, I know, on digital waste, on waste that causes problems for us even when it comes to carbon emissions. So I think asking the right questions, both public sector, private sector clients, is very crucial. Another initiative in the UK that RICS is involved is called the Value Toolkit, which essentially is an upfront tool when you're setting up your programs and projects to look at not just the first cost, but look at other aspects of the project when you're trying to start a project. So look at social value, look at carbon emissions or sustainability in a very collective, cohesive way. So bring an outcomes-based framework when you're setting up your projects. So they're just not narrowly focused on the first cost of the project.
And by the way, I think one of the great things that we're learning here is that there are resources for you. If you combine the efforts and learnings from Singapore, the UK, even the BIM initiatives in Japan, what's been going on in the US, you shouldn't start from scratch if you're the government trying to figure out how to do this. And by the way, in India, we just opened an amazing office with our global delivery hub there with fantastically skilled people. We have a consulting group that works out of that group, and I come and work out of that group globally with Anil, even to come and help people get on this journey. You have a fantastic partner in Capricorn. You are in a place that is got tons of educated resources at your fingertips at a quick, WhatsApp message or a LinkedIn comment, or if you hook up with us in LinkedIn, happy to direct you to any of those resources. You are resource rich right now in the region that you're in to really capitalize on these business model changes. And by the way, in other regions, they're doing it because they realize they won't exist one day. If you are doing things the way you've always done them, think about all the Fortune 500 companies that don't exist anymore on those lists. This is an opportunity right now for India, especially as Autodesk. I always like to say, look, let's talk about the transformation framework for a minute, Anil. You're talking about transforming businesses right now and understanding different vision and value drivers and outcomes that will allow you to understand what's important to you, whether it's holistic sustainability or understanding how to create better products or business growth. But in order to get there, you first have to understand what is the maturity of your current organizations, which, by the way, both Anil and I come out and we can do a maturity assessment as well as some baseline education for you in working with your partners here at Capricorn. So, but foundationally, you have to have the right culture, skills, and tools. That's that mindset shift that we talked about, so that you can productize both the physical piece parts and the digital workflows that are necessary for industrialized construction. You first need to understand what that is so that you can digitize it and then automate it, eliminating some processes that you don't need to do anymore. But this platform connection, enabling by the cloud, is very interesting because, again, think about assumption-based design. 40% of what's in our landfills right now is construction waste. Why? Because we are designing things that will never be made the way in which they are designed. We must make sure that the make data is informing our design, that products, we are productizing things, can be reused over and over again to bring them to scale so that we don't have cutting and waste and garbage of materials on site, on our job site. That's super important so that we can optimize these capabilities like generative design and digital twins and industrialized construction. Because ultimately, like Anil said, I love to say digital waste exponentially leads to physical waste, right? And we can't afford that. But let's think about India in particular. That all needs to come together. And the reason I came to Autodesk from industry is I came for the Autodesk platform. Right now, think of it as almost like with the Forma, Fusion, and Flow release of the cloud models, information models at AAU last year. You're basically witnessing the ability to get on the Apple platform in its earlier days. There's a lot, as you digitize and understand the mapping of these workflows, there's lots of little apps. I think right now we have 4,500 apps that are on the platform, maybe like almost 200 a month are being built. What are you participating in to take the technology and the know-how you have in the amazing app developers, the amazing skills that you have in India around this sector, to create some of that digital glue that stitches together the platform? Look, I always say on Apple, Waze, which is a directional, app, lives on my Apple platform. It's worth billions now. There's also Apple Maps and Google Maps on this platform. And I think that's the beauty of the Autodesk platform right now, that it's enabling countries and companies to create their own destiny, as if it's almost like the start of the internet kind of opportunity. That's what we're talking about here. And I think if you want to truly transform, our consulting practice is based on helping our customers reach better outcomes and transforming their businesses. That is a big part because, Anil, I'll jump to this for a minute and then we'll go to live questions. Industrialized construction is a journey. It's got interdependencies, it's got maturities at each of these solutions. Every one of these solutions has levels of maturity that would hinder you from getting to the next step or hinder you from getting to, places that are beyond the maturity of the next step. You need all of this if you truly want to get one day to a digital factory and looking at components, construction components out on job sites. And I'm only showing you one end state from a fabricator to becoming a manufacturer. There are lots of end states, from owners to being digitally driven serial owners, or from architects to becoming generative design architects. There's many solutions, these complex solutions that have capabilities and workflows and software products, ours and others, that need help from your partners at Capricot to help you go through each one of these parts of the journey. There's interdependencies, and there's lots of little tools that still need to be built to connect lots of these processes. I think the size of the prize is enormous. And there are I would almost say every one of those little dots can be a giant billion-dollar prize that your company could take part in really creating. So I think that's what you have to truly understand about this. It is complex, there's opportunity, and there's also risk if you don't understand the basics of what's happening and where change is coming from. Anil, I would take that agreement. That was a lot of talking, I know, about transforming our businesses.
It makes a lot of sense, even though I would like to challenge you a little bit. In
Sure.
Your first slide on the transformation framework, you put productization before digitization. So can you truly become productized without having your digital tools in play? Or is it, but I think you've sort of answered that by giving that connected picture. That is, it's not a straight line. Even though you've said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it may be that you first do a little bit of digitization or digital transformation and then do productization, and it's an iterative process that plays off of each one plays off. So that's question one. But to address, and there are so many questions, I think we need to stop talking and start addressing some of the questions. But on timelines and schedules and cost savings, one thing that for sure is a low-hanging fruit is certainty, which is your number one in your transformation journey. So you can bring schedule certainty, you can bring cost certainty when you adopt industrialized construction. So then you can, and then you can start approaching savings from after bringing schedule and cost certainty. So Shitanshu, I suggest we reduce the number of words we are using, focus on the questions and try to address some of the questions.
I love these questions.
Absolutely, sir. So one of the very important questions is around standards. So I will take that question from Mr. Jayakrishan, Mrs. Jayakrishan. In the absence of proper IS standards for ISC, DfMA design related products, isn't the barrier entry difficult in India, as owners and consultants find it risky to go against the conventional IS compliant methodologies? So for any IS and Indian standards, so like you have other standards. So that's what you're talking about. How
I see the question that you're talking about, and he's mentioning precast adoption as an example, right? That's the question we're talking about, I think, right now, right? So I have a different, this is my own opinion as Amy Marks. I think markets set standards. I'm a capitalist by nature. People always ask me, are you a feminist? What's your political, my political standing is I'm a capitalist. I believe as people make products that we want, people enable that to be utilized, and people then enable that through code and creating, the market creates standards. Now, I'm not saying no one should create a building standard or building code, but like Anil said, what comes first in that conversation? You started with the pizza, right? I knew I had a product. I could attach data to that product. I could attach data to that bathroom pod, to that wall panel, to that interior finish, to that precast panel. I think it starts with what do we make, and enabling technology to help us in that product development and process development of the thing we make, so that we can automate some of these methodologies. But I do think that I am a firm believer that, look, we already have building codes. As long as you're making things within building code right now, which many in our world are when it comes to, manufacturing and industrialized construction, if you're a fabricator in your MEP shop. To me, I believe right now the thing that's holding us back more than anything in this world is, unlike everything else in my experience, if I want to go buy shoes today, or a fishing pole, or a Jeep, or a prestige, dosa grinder, I could go on my phone right now and I could find it in about 2 seconds and implement it. And it would say, by the way, here's the star rating of that product, and you should buy this, these shoes with this shirt and these socks. And it would give me a generative bundle based on my preferences and based on what's been utilized in the past. We don't have that currently in this world. We are purely working off our mouth and our feet to go and sell and basically at its generic way. We don't really have a connected ecosystem that enables capitalism to shape our futures. And I think that's a very important thing to note, that is, I think, regardless of who does it, that is coming. And that will really change a lot of these conversations around standards and scale and what's acceptable, because the market's going to dictate that. That's why you buy pepperoni on pizza and not, something that doesn't exist. You can always make pizza, customize it. It just costs a lot more. But like 9 out of 10 people buy pepperoni or buy, something else that's like mushroom pizza. They don't buy something you've never heard of. You know what I mean?
So Shithanshu, I was maybe Amy slightly differing view here. I do see, especially in India, the procurement regime and the regulatory regime to be a barrier to some of these innovative ideas, especially when it comes to products, newer products. And in fact, that's actually true even in the US. The code compliance issue, which is centered around safety, public safety, and all those things, very important, should be addressed. I think generally you will notice that our codes are backward looking. They rely, and even our procurement is backward looking. They want to see the history, they want to see the experiences, they want to see the safety record before you move into an innovative tool. So we have to strike the right balance. In India, you have the evaluation services that BMTPC provides for new products before they become mainstream. In the US, similarly, you have the ICC's evaluation service where they look at new products and provide testing and other certifications that make these products then go mainstream. So it's always going to be this chicken and egg situation. But again, we can't just sit and keep on admiring the problem. We got to figure out the solutions. And I think eventually, if all stakeholders come together, there are some good solutions that can be found.
Interestingly enough, in the US, I was just talking to one of my electrical contractors and I was watching them talk on stage. And they were just making prefabricated assemblies, Anil. And they, with the supply chain pressures that are here, even in the US, they decided to take things that they, and the problem with looking backwards is when you use assumption-based design, looking backwards gives you a million different examples that aren't, replicable, right? They're not the same. So you're looking back, it's almost like saying, if you were talking about a record in cricket and there's an asterisk next to that record in sports, it really kind of means almost nothing. It was like something was different. We're looking back at thousands of asterisks when we look backwards. And so this electrical contractor decided they're going to go through the UL listing for a bunch of assemblies because they want to just use them over and over and over again and have designers. So they've become true manufacturers by going through the building product manufacturing UL certification here in the United States for certain of their products now, that they are no longer making differently every time. If you want to use those, you will use one of their products like you would order from a catalog. So I think I'm not saying that government doesn't play a role or even people like that, but we can work within those right now. They exist and you can get everything you want as long as we understand that it's got to start with a product that you can do over and over again. And I think most people forget a building is a building made up of a million different products. When we say IC, it doesn't have to be the whole building. You could talk about just the MEP behind the walls, above the ceilings, underground, and somebody can use, because they don't have to use those products. Like, listen, you're not designing elevators because it's a product. You don't have to do that anymore. You don't design generators because it's a product. If architects had to design generators every single time, we'd be that much slower in getting any building done. So we want to take more and more of those pieces of the buildings and decouple them from process into physical products that you can reuse. That's the gist of that, right?
Absolutely. So, Shitanshu, I think one suggestion I have is that we take, and I'm sure your team will be able to copy paste the questions. I think to do justice to the interest shown by our audience, we should answer those maybe in a blog or an article as the webinar closes.
Or another webinar, Anil. Why don't we do another webinar and we can start addressing some of these questions, because I think it's really
agree.
important.
And we have shared the link to the industrialized construction curriculum, both from the Autodesk education website and the customer success website. I've done that, but we'll follow up with more information. And I'm sure Shitanshu Capricorn team also has more resources that can be shared. I think there are several questions. I will let Shitanshu pick the most important ones or interesting ones.
So there's one question basically around how do we start with DfMA? So it's around, because the multidisciplinary nature of the construction ecosystem, the need for all stakeholders to be on such tech platforms together is a big risk for developers. It's about the nature of the industry. I know it could be a very big answer on this, but they basically are asking what's the advice for a pilot project, say an office building in a metro. So how they can, somebody can start if they're interested in DfMA or IC, what kind of project they can start with, or how they should go about it.
First, I'm going to throw up my contact information. Why? Because I have no idea if your company can even pull off doing an industrialized construction housing project or any kind of pilot project, because you first need to assess your maturity. You first need that's like saying, like, how would I start in my cricket career? I'm going to start with understanding, do you even have the ability to play cricket? Do you have the right tools, the right skills, the right physicality, the right training that can teach me how to play cricket? That's where you start. And I would say in my world, the reason I threw up my contact information is feel free to contact me, Capricorn, Dr. Anil, is that's where you start. Don't jump to the end state without knowing how to, make sure that you're ready for that. Is that fair, Anil?
It is. And I mean, I know it's a very difficult question to answer in such a short time, but my first point that I'd like to make is bring all your teams together. Don't do this, or take it to your BIM team and say, okay, let's do industrialized construction. You got to bring all your partners, all your teams and stakeholders together. Difficult to do, easy to say, but that should be one of the perhaps starting points. And then there are several resources available, Introduction to Industrialized Construction being one of them, Amy's maturity model, the transformation model are some other tools that you really need to sit back, judge where you are in that journey and where do you want to go. Not everyone wants to become a manufacturer from a fabricator, or you don't want to embrace all ideas and concepts. It may be a subset of those ideas. As long as creating a connected picture for you, I think that's worth the journey.
So thank you so much. I think that's a very pertinent question, because people would like to know where they can start their journey of IC, and we have given a lot of resources and thoughts to them today. We actually have extended this webinar for a couple of more minutes. So if we can take up any other, so you can instead of taking up a question, we can answer that offline. I would request if you can just close off this webinar with some thoughts, like to close the loop, like what people should be doing or what they expect to be the future of work in construction, in short. How to bring all these technologies together. Yeah, please.
I think every time you think about what your future in construction should be or will be, think about expected experience. Now, I'm going to say something that might sound a little controversial here. If I am 51 years old, I don't want to use my expected experience, even though I use technology every day. Think about somebody who works for you that's in their 20s and the way in which they interact in their daily lives with technology and with process and with the ways they consume things and use things and create their lives. Think about that expected experience and how you would apply it to our world before you think about what the future looks like, and ask them what they believe the future state looks like. I think, I'm not saying that anyone over 50 doesn't also have a good view of the future state, but I think if you truly want to understand, I have a reverse mentor, get a reverse mentor and ask them what they think the future looks like.
Shitanshu, a couple of points in closing that I'd like to make. I see several of our Indian experts in the audience. Aditya, Amit, Dr. Mona Shah, and all. I think there is a need to create a knowledge base or a knowledge network on industrialized construction, not just in India and perhaps all emerging markets or in a global setting. And Amy and I, we are very keen to set up that crowdsourced knowledge network on industrialized construction. The second point I want to make is to all my students, former students, this is a great opportunity for widgets, gadgets, and apps and startups. Think of a niche area, think of an area that you can contribute. Maybe there is an app that you can develop in the area of industrialized construction. So there's a huge opportunity, not just in India, globally, to come up with these ideas and present them to promote industrialized construction for our sector. So there's ample opportunity for all of us to contribute.
Well said, Anil.
Thank you. Thank you
We
to
just-
everyone.
Just scratched the surface today, so I think we should come back, Anil, and do a part
I
two.
already see one of the comments from the audience that there should be a follow-up webinar. No pressure, Shitanshu, but come up with a date and time. As long as it's not before 7 a.m. my time, I think I can do it.
Hey,
Absolutely,
Shaitan,
sir.
I'll end with one last thing. I do see a question. Is there a maturity assessment matrix? Yes. Give us a call. You can actually do a maturity assessment workshop, and we'll figure out how in India. We just launched that here in the United States. I'll work with our global delivery hub there to talk about those that may want that to bring it over with maybe even Dr. Anil and our team here to bring that over. I think that's important. So yes, these resources are available to you.
So on that, if you don't mind, what we can do is that when you send a thank you mail to all the attendees, we can send both of your coordinates in that mail, and they can reach out to both of you for more information around that respective topics of your expertise. So that would be a great way for them to reach out to you. So with that,
Thank you for having us, by the way.
It was all our pleasure. I think the audience learned a lot, and like Sani sir said, we would do more of these events. We'll try to make it a quarterly kind of event, and there are a lot of things to cover, and we will definitely, so we'll brainstorm with you with all the topics, and we'll definitely make it a ongoing process. Yes. So thank you all. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day and a great evening.
Bye-bye.